Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede, and the Republican legislature is pushing through a ban on abortion after just 6 weeks of pregnancy. Governor Ron DeSantis has promised to sign the bill, and last week a group of women held a protest opposing the new abortion law in Tallahassee. During that peaceful protest, Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried and State Senator Lauren Book were arrested. I spoke to Book after her arrest and asked her what happened after the police led her away in handcuffs.
We were taken actually under City Hall, where we were everybody had their names and addresses checked into the system. We were put into, I was put in the back of a patrol car. Some of the group was put into different paddy wagons and were taken to the jail. Once we were at the jail, we were processed and put in holding until we were booked through. And eventually I was released on my own recognizance and have an arraignment in about a week or so, maybe a week and a half, as was all of the women and one gentleman who were with us that day, that night. And, it took several hours for that to occur. It was a very long night.
Why did you feel this was necessary to stage this protest?
Well, it wasn't a staged protest. There was an occupied group of women who had been out all day. It's my understanding they had a permit. The permit was revoked. They were going to continue to be there. They were having a press conference, as they had had several during the day, at 7:30. They asked all lawmakers to be there. Senator Berman and I did show up at the 7:30 press conference, as well as Chair Fried. And once we did the press conference, Chair Fried and I decided we wanted to sit with some of these women, bear witness to their stories. They were singing and chanting. Some of them were abortion clinic escorts who walk women from their car to the abortion clinics, protect them from folks on the outside screaming and yelling as they're trying to go get healthcare services. And it became very, very clear things were getting escalated. Things go very, very quickly. Law enforcement came out and said that they needed to move and they needed to leave. It was very clear that these women and these folks were not going to move. And Chair Fried and I sort of looked at each other and knew in that moment that we couldn't leave them. We weren't just going to let them, go down like that. And we stayed and we sat with them until law enforcement, then a few moments later said, round them up. And they came and they took everybody away in handcuffs. There was no fighting back, no resisting. I was very peaceful. And then, like I said, we were brought under the City Hall and booked and processed.
So it wasn't your intention to be arrested. In other words, you didn't go into this saying, I'm going to commit an act of civil disobedience and be arrested?
No, I certainly didn't. I would have worn different shoes, Jim. It's really, was there to be a part. I knew that these folks had, was very clear when we got there, a lot of escalating feelings, and that was something that they were going to do. Again, probably would have worn sneakers if that were the case. Learned lesson. Don't ever go to a press conference without alternative footwear if you want to engage in civil disobedience. But when you are in the moment and you are listening to these folks share their truths, their stories, and quite frankly, the abortion bill passed off the floor that day. It had been a very, very emotional day, a lot of debate from my colleagues who were there, talking about their abortion stories. Senator Davis talked about her journey with abortion, talking through my own sister who had to have an abortion because her psychiatric medication wasn't compatible with pregnancy. This had been a lot of very raw emotion, a long day after the week before doing, 20 amendments on the floor. This is one of those things that my caucus and I fought, that I feel so fundamentally about for such a long time, that it was a very emotionally charged, evening.
Were any of your amendments, by the way, any of the amendments offered by the Democrats accepted or passed?
None of the amendments that the Democrats offered were accepted, no.
And give me an idea what some of those amendments would have been.
You know, this abortion bill, Senate Bill 300, is more restrictive than even the bill that exists in Texas. And how and why is that? We don't allow for any telehealth, the use of any telehealth at all. You have to have two doctors to assert that they can take a pregnancy because of fetal fatal abnormality. We know because we've heard testimony, and actually the Senate Democratic Caucus held meetings after session because they were only allowed to speak for 30 seconds in regular committee, that there are deserts where they're
Wait a second. Let me just stop you there. You're saying that when the women who traveled to Tallahassee appeared before the committee, they were given only 30 seconds to speak?
Yes, this has been a very, very difficult process. It is painful to watch. After 6 and 8 hours, oftentimes people drive to Tallahassee, especially abortion providers, doctors who can actually give us real information when creating policy. None of us are doctors. They were given 30 seconds to speak. And so the Democratic caucus actually sat for hours after committee to listen to that testimony because it is that important. There are very real consequences of not having a doctor informing some of these policies, and we're seeing those things. And so it's an extreme bill. There's $25 million going to fake crisis pregnancy centers throughout the state of Florida. These are religious-based facilities that oftentimes put themselves next to abortion providers. They don't give real health information. It is an all-out, let's call it what it is, a ban on abortion. You don't know that you're pregnant oftentimes at 6 weeks. There is an exemption for rape and incest as well as human trafficking, but that's only up until 15 weeks. At 15 weeks, that cuts off, creating a situation where women are going to have three choices in the state of Florida. One, you're going to have the money to be able to flee the state and become a medical refugee to get the care that you need, likely in North Carolina. Two, you're going to take matters into your own hands. And I would ask all of the women who are watching this to not do that. Please don't take matters into your own hands. There's going to be some time before the effects of this bill are going to be felt, and that's because it will likely happen after the Supreme Court rules on some of the privacy provisions in our Constitution. So please don't take matters into your own hands. Call your healthcare providers. And three, the other option is going to be to accuse someone of sexual assault, so you have a little bit more time. Those are the only options that women in the state of Florida are going to have. And I am very concerned, as you and I have talked for a long time, as a survivor of sexual assault, the very real consequence of the fight that I have been in for quite some time to believe women. Oftentimes you've heard what was she wearing? How much makeup did she have on? Was she drinking? We're going to put women in a situation where their only other option is going to be to assert the rape and incest exemption, to have a little bit more time. And I am concerned about the very real implications of that. There are also other healthcare issues that are related to this. No pregnancy is the same for every woman. And I know of at least two women in my district who had suffered a pregnancy situation where their amniotic sac had broken. They were past 15 weeks of pregnancy and they couldn't get an abortion. They had to keep the pregnancy, the fetus, in their body until they developed sepsis. That is third world. That is insanity, that in the world that we're living in today, because the GOP don't want to use science, they want to use religious and political rhetoric to create policy. And the implications are devastating for women.
You talked about the idea of falsely accusing someone as a potential pattern, but more importantly as well, if you are a victim of rape or incest and you are seeking an abortion under that exemption, even prior to 15 weeks, right? Anything past 6 weeks, correct?
Anything past, you basically have a little grace period up to 15 weeks to have that exemption. And to seek that exemption, you have to do a couple of things. You have to have a police report, a medical record, a court injunction to be able to assert that additional 15 weeks to give that to an abortion provider to get that exemption, which is,
So essentially, if I am, let's say, if I'm a woman and I'm raped by my uncle or a family member, and I don't want to report it. This is the worst moment of my life, and the last thing I want to do is go to the police or file a restraining order in court where I have to document this. But I become pregnant and I want it to be dealt with. I have to now publicly say I was raped and file a document with the courts or with the police saying as much in order to get this, correct? So I have to out myself as a rape victim.
Or have a medical record. Yes, that's correct. Which again is shocking and completely horrifying when you really look at what happened as this bill was passing off the Senate floor. The governor was quietly signing the permitless carry bill, where you don't have to show documents to buy a deadly weapon, but you do if you've been raped or a product of incest to get an abortion. That's where we are today in the state of Florida. It is horrific, to say the least, but those are the only way that you can get that additional exemption at 15 weeks.
Why are we passing this in Florida? What do you believe is the motivation of your colleagues to do this when there is nothing that I've ever seen in any polling, any information in the state of Florida that suggests the people of Florida want a virtual outright ban on abortion in the state? What is the motivation for your colleagues, do you believe?
The governor has, obviously, we've talked a lot about this. The governor has made, I think it's no secret that he wants to run for higher office. And to do that, he has to have a platform and build a base. And you're right, this is wildly unpopular. We've seen that in our state. 75% of Floridians think this is insanity and don't support this all-out ban on abortion. And quite frankly, we've seen around the country, people don't support this. He's running for president, and he's destroying the state of Florida on his path to get there. Once rights are gone, they're very, very hard if you can ever get them back. And let's be very clear about one thing. Women will die. Because of this bill, women and girls will die in the state of Florida.
When we come back, we'll hear from the minority leader in the Florida House, Fentrice Driskell. Stay with us.